Come here, get close for a second. Can I just talk about something that has been on my mind? Also, for the sense of intimacy, I'm trying something a little different and actually holding the microphone just to see how it sounds. Deathcore is low-key fucking killing it in such a way that I don't think people fully understand that it is literally doing better than most genres could ever wish for in terms of like evolution naturally. See, I understand I grew up like a nu metal and an alt metal fan and like classic grunge and heavy metal and shit, but I was also privy to the rise of deathcore, especially like in the 2010s, and a lot of those bands, they're favorites of mine. I own a lot of shit from discographies and merch and shit. I have a lot of good memories with a lot of deathcore bands. But the thorough line of deathcore is something that I don't think a lot of people give full credit where it's due. There are very few other genres that have been able to successfully maintain a middle ground position of having a ton of hallmark bands and a ton of bands that are still performing the style in the way that it was in its infancy and keeping the spirit of that alive, while simultaneously branching out into so many different directions that deathcore is one of the most versatile and dynamic genres, in spite of sort of the allegations of it being one of the most one-note, one-dimensional genres, which kind of just came about from a bunch of people who didn't think anything with core at the end was real metal. Which, let's be honest, anyone who actually thought that were jackasses. You couldn't have got a more purist metal YouTuber than Count Blaggeroth, and he even said, yeah, shut the fuck up, deathcore is metal. But the biggest thing that inspired this video was the recent release of Whitechapel's single, Visceral Retch, which I heavily recommend if you haven't heard it already. Or Shadow of Intent, or any of Lorna Shore, or Worm Shepherd, or Mental Cruelty, and it kind of just reminded me that throughout the 2010s, we got serviced with so much good deathcore music and evolution in the genre. You had the bands that were more progressive, the djenty bands, the Born of Osiris's, the Veil of Maya's, which I still stand by Eclipse by Veil of Maya being the preeminent deathcore record, and like must listening if you want to listen to one of the best deathcore records in my opinion. And I have been pretty critical of a lot of like the Lorna Shore copycat bands who are just playing for clickbait, you know, the ones that want a red arrow pointing at someone's oh my god face, or just pandering to Twitch streamers that will react to your song because of a breakdown, playing around the breakdown. And while I will say that there are a lot of deathcore and metalcore bands, especially in recent memory, that have placated to the breakdown and built the foundation of their song around the bedrock of a breakdown as opposed to building a good song and having a breakdown in it, there is still so much fun deathcore that is coming around all of the time, and even if some of it can be pretty overproduced, the spirit is still there, and I think Whitechapel proved that. Because I don't think anyone can say that Whitechapel don't have the long-standing chops, or that Phil Bozeman isn't an absolute demon, goblin, gremlin motherfucker when it comes to the vocals. He is incredible, and a lot of people are saying that this comeback was their way of staking their claim in the deathcore niche and just saying, Daddy Phil is home. Showing that there might be, you know, Will Ramos and there may be Alex Terribles in the game, but the OGs can really kick it. So while a band like Suicide Silence might just be kinda dog shit now, no offense to Eddie, while deathcore isn't necessarily the raw, immature, primitive genre that it once was with bands like All Shall Perish and As Blood Runs Black, early Suicide Silence, early Bring Me the Horizon, some of Whitechapel's early material even, or Job for a Cowboy back in the Doom era, I think that there are still a lot of bands that have that style, even if it isn't produced as raw. There's still plenty of very raw deathcore bands out there, and while bands like Whitechapel and I would say Thy Art Is Murder really did change the game when it came to how deathcore production was approached, very big, you sounded like a skyscraper, I think that there still is a lot of heart to a lot of what deathcore can do, and while it is easy to write off a lot of these bands as just being breakdown enthusiasts, the biggest bands in the genre I think still make some very quality material. It definitely does depend on what you want from your music, because if you aren't really interested in just hearing a ton of breakdowns in your music or very heaviness, I can understand why it may not be appealing to you, and if that isn't what you want, there are plenty of other deathcore bands that don't just pander to breakdowns and incorporate other influences. The Mental Cruelties and the Worm Shepherds are very sort of Lorna Shore-ish in how they incorporate symphonic elements and black metal elements in their music, and then you have other bands like Shadow of Intent to some degree, as well as Brand of Sacrifice, which sort of are more progressive and djenty, still symphonic, but much more progressive in the way that they approach stuff, and then you have the Constant Fury of projects like Signs of the Swarm and all of that sort of stuff, and then you also have some of the classic bands that are still coming out with with kick-ass music. Whitechapel, even if some people didn't really like how Kin or The Valley came out, they were still very beautiful records in their own regard, or a band like Chelsea Grin. And with newer bands, or newer in quotes bands, like Slaughter to Prevail and Lorna Shore, which are really putting deathcore on the center stage, I would argue that deathcore is more in the limelight than it ever was, and that's saying something because there was a time when deathcore was like a zeitgeist in the metal world. It was sitting shoulder to shoulder with metalcore as like the big genre. Bands like Suicide Silence and early Bring Me the Horizon were genre defining, movement defining. There were so many people that wanted to look like, sing like, scream like Mitch Lucker and Ollie Sykes in the early days, the Suicide Season and Count Your Blessings days, and the Disengage era of Suicide Silence. So those bands cannot be like sold short in any regard, but I think that in terms of sort of desensitizing the market to heaviness, it kind of comes with its perks of putting metal in front of people in a way that it never really has with this sort of extreme touch to it. You have entire documentaries about Will Ramos. He's becoming a cultural celebrity in his own regard, and with like the charismatic voice, like the voice coach that did all that stuff about like seeing how he did his vocals. Deathcore is really being put in the limelight, and especially with like Slaughter to Prevail making the rounds, these bigger vocalists are becoming like cultural symbols, not only for deathcore, but transcending it in the metal world in a way that Mitch Lucker and Ollie Sykes did with all of these other bands as well. And I also think it's beautiful that deathcore does not really seem to have that much purism or gatekeeping. Is it there? Surely, but compared to a lot of other extreme metal genres like death metal and black metal and grindcore, it really seems like deathcore has embraced the evolution, has embraced the progress, has embraced the beauty of stepping out of the confinements of that comfort zone and redefining what deathcore can be. And not only have the fans embraced that, they have given it the platform for so many more people to get into the music. And I think that is one thing I respect a lot about the deathcore community coming from it, because I grew up a core person through and through. I loved metalcore and deathcore, and I loved a lot of other extreme metal genres and listen to more extreme metal genres now than metalcore and deathcore, but I have such a fond appreciation for how far both genres have come, but specifically deathcore, because metalcore definitely has its fair share of gatekeeping and weird tendencies, weird standards, especially if you go to like the beatdown people, and metalcore has a lot of different branches with the hardcore kids as well as the tough gym bros, the As I Lay Dying fans, and then you have the scene emo kids, so it can get a little bit hairy, whereas deathcore really does feel like a very warm and welcoming community, funnily enough. And I really haven't personally dealt with much toxicity coming from the deathcore community, and maybe that's just my experience, and if you guys relate to it in a different way, I understand completely. If anything, this video is a love letter and an open invitation to talk about your experience with deathcore, both modern as well as older, and if you feel like the scene has come a long way, because I really think the community has flourished into something that is beautiful and that a lot of other metal subgenres could take notes from. What are your guys' opinions of this? You can let me know down in the comment section below how you feel about modern deathcore. I would love to hear it. Agree or disagree, there is no wrong answer. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is, my name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.